Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first Olive Tree Media webinar for 2024. It's great to have you joining us live, or if you're watching the replay, welcome. We're really excited to have Jo Frost joining us today. She works for the Evangelical Alliance UK, and she's head of communications and engagement. But we've brought her in for this conversation today because she's co-authored a book called Being Human. And today we're going to dive into what it means to be human, what is uniquely marked in us as humanity, and what makes this good news for our world. So Karl Faase will be interviewing Jo, and we'll be here for about an hour. So we're really pleased that you've joined us. So if you're joining us from Australia or worldwide, why don't you let us know in the chat where you're from? We would love to hear which corner of the world you're from. And we'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands that you are joining us from. We just recognise their stewardship throughout generations on behalf of our Almighty God and Creator. So make sure you join the chat, engage in the conversation. And if you have a question, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. And just put a Q at the start of your question so that we can see the questions and flag them with Jo and Karl later. And while you're here, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got a couple more of these webinars coming up for the rest of the year. So that will just mean that you can get alerted and know when they're happening. So let me welcome Karl and let's get started.
Ains, thank you for the welcome and the introduction. It's good to be here. Now, before we go to meet Jo, speaking of books, Ainsley's written a book that's about to be published. Tell us, what's the name of the book and what's it about?
Yes, I have been beavering away for the last year working on a book called Impress. And this book is primarily for Christian parents who are parenting today. And it comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, where Moses is speaking to a new generation. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. These commandments are to be on your hearts. Impress them upon your children. And it's a call to the current cohort of parents about what it means and what it looks like to talk about and impress faith on our kids. And what does this mean in our homes, not just kind of taking them to church on a Sunday? So it's a real encouragement to parents to give it a go and try and just weave faith as part of their everyday lives in their homes. And it's basically an idea that we as parents are missionaries and evangelists to the next generation, and it's hopefully going to equip parents in their role as an evangelist.
So that's fantastic. And we're at Olive Tree Media working with Ainsley to get this book out. It's going to be out in the early part of May, hopefully ready for Mother's Day. So Ainsley, well done. And then the next webinar, which we'll tell you about at the end of today's webinar, we're going to chat a bit more to Ainsley. Thank you. Right now, we want to welcome Jo Frost from sunny London. Jo, how are you doing and how's London?
I'm so damp. It's so wet out there. It's just dismal. Yeah, it's been a long winter. It's about two and a half years long this winter so far. So I've been hearing it's glorious in Sydney, and I'm praying very hard that God calls me.
When we chatted to Jo just before we started the webinar, she said, what's it like in Sydney? And we started moaning about how hot it is. Didn't go so well with Jo. Jo, you work for EA. Who is EA and what do they do?
So we are the Evangelical Alliance. We unite individuals, churches and charities, all with one single purpose: to make Jesus known around the UK and beyond. We're a membership organisation based around evangelical unity. But ultimately, we want to do two things. We want to proclaim the gospel in words, in actions, and deeds, so that people have the opportunity to hear the transforming power of the gospel. And we also want to speak up for the gospel and for the church, so raise issues that matter to the church into places of power. So the government, the media, in all 4 nations of the UK.
Now, the intriguing thing, Jo, is that, say, people in Australia, for those in Australia, there's a heap of people from Victoria, South Australia, even somebody from New Zealand. Sorry about the cricket, the New Zealand viewer, watcher. Don't leave because we've mentioned that. Now, just EA in the UK actually has a lot of churches and organisations connected, doesn't it? How many organisations are connected to EA? Do you know?
So we're about 800 charities, we're about 3,000 churches, and we're at 23,000 individual members.
Wow, that's
So it's,
absolutely
yeah,
remarkable.
it's doing all right.
Yeah. So, Joe, you and Peter Linus, who also works for EA, and he's in Belfast, Northern Ireland, wrote this book called Being Human. Firstly, why the book? Why write the book?
Oh, so it was a combination of things. So Peter is our UK director. He oversees a lot of our advocacy work and was being asked more and more to speak on hot topics, controversial things, things that nobody else wants to speak about because they're going to get yelled at on Twitter. And we were finding that when we were talking about these things, when Peter was talking about these things, we had to do a theology basis and then get to the issue. There wasn't this kind of understanding, this foundational understanding about who we are and how we're made and how we're to live before we could get to the hot topic. So we were constantly having to sort of give the basics before we could get to the big stuff. I was coming from a more of a missional perspective where, although we were very good at telling gospel truths, it didn't always come across as particularly good news. And yet, if you take Jesus seriously when he comes to offer life in all its fullness, then the gospel has to offer full and abundant life to everybody. But again, we weren't very good at saying why that is, what it means to be human in the image of God, as we're made in the image of God. So the two of us started chatting. As all good conversations happened, that then decided, oh, this sounds interesting, we should do a podcast. So we started doing a podcast, and worryingly, people started listening. And off the back of that, we thought, actually, we've probably got something that we need to put out there to be able to move this conversation forward. So the book came out.
Right in the beginning of the book, it's interesting. It's actually on page 6. You quote Charles Taylor, and he wrote a tome called A Secular Age. It's like about 600 pages, I think.
Yeah,
Now,
no one's read it. Everyone just
Yeah.
quotes it.
Now, the interesting thing is, you said, 500 years ago, Taylor says, it was almost unthinkable not to believe in God. Now it's almost unthinkable to believe in God. Is that shift part of the motivation for the book? Because that's a big shift in a relatively short time against human history.
Absolutely. And it's the backdrop to so many things. So one of the things that we talk about in the book is the stories that we're immersed in, because stories shape us. Stories give us understanding, meaning. They tell us how to operate. They give us a kind of framework. And our shared stories, our cultural stories, the stories we all agree on, or at least the stories that we accept and understand that the other person will have the same. So if we want to have a conversation about who we are and how we're to live, then we need to understand the common stories. And that used to be a common story of God. So you didn't have to do the God bit in order to be able to have the discipleship conversation. Now you absolutely have to have the God bit, because the God bit isn't a given. In fact, if anything, it's kind of cute and it's kind of quaint. Oh, yeah. Bless you. So that conversation, that shift in our collective understanding, we have to understand what that is and how it shapes us, so that we're able to bring in the gospel story, the true and better, beautiful story of who we are in God, in order to be able to have a conversation with the people around us.
Yeah, from a Christian worldview, we and for those listening with us, there's this notion that we view the world through the story of Jesus, the story of the Bible, the story of creation, all of that. What you're saying here is that there are actually competing stories, as it were. Give us an example of one or two. What are the competing stories that people are grasping to make sense of life?
So we break the conversation around what it means to be human into 4 parts. So we look at the idea of significance, that I matter, you matter, our lives are somehow important. We look at the idea of connection, that we matter to each other, that no man's an island, that we have relationships, that we're wired for relationships, and sometimes they go wrong, sometimes they go right, but we have to relate to each other. We look at the idea that we're present. I'm in a body, I'm in a time zone. It's a different time zone to you, but we are physical, temporal beings. And we look at the idea of participation, that what we do makes a difference, that we have some kind of power in the world. All of these things are true for all of us. but the stories of how they work and what they do and the impact they have, they differ. So significance, for example, L'Oreal has been telling women forever that you're worth it, right? You buy the makeup, you do the hair, but ultimately underneath, you're worth it. But actually, L'Oreal has no capability of telling us why that is, who's worth it more, who's more beautiful. Is beauty the foundation of our significance? Do you earn it? Do you conjure it up, some kind of internal thing? These stories about your significance float around us all the time. And yet the God story will turn around and say, you matter because you bear the image of the Creator. You point back to the origin of life itself. You matter because you reflect the one who matters most. That is a very different story to the story that we hear all around us every day and everybody's arguing about. So whether it's an immigration thing, whether it's an economic thing, whether it's an education thing, whether it's a beauty thing, those questions of significance are everywhere. And we need to understand some of those stories and the impact that they have on our lives in order to be able to say, actually, do you know why you matter and what that does to who you are and how you treat others?
I mean, interesting. I want to come back to those 4 areas and explore them a little with you. But it's interesting. Somebody I quote endlessly, and so why not use today as an opportunity? I noted Justin Briley, who's on our series that we're doing later this year, has just interviewed Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor, for those of you who were watching the Oscars last night, but the actual historian. Now, and the whole point that Tom Holland has really broken into Western cultures a lot with is the notion that what you were just saying then, Joe, that we have this notion that everybody is worth something and everybody has dignity and worth, and we should honor people with dignity and worth. But his point is, well, without a Christian story, that concept has no basis. And it's intriguing the number of people that seem to be having a bit of an aha moment with that, especially, Joe, because Tom Holland, I think he's probably fairly close, and we've chatted to Justin Briley, and I know you know Justin. He feels he's probably close to the kingdom of God, but he doesn't come at this from a Christian as a Christian. He comes at this from a kind of historical worldview and looks at the development of Western nations and said this notion of worth is actually a Christian idea. So part of what I think you're trying to do in this book, and we're talking about, is to do the same as that Tom Holland's doing, is to remind people the story that gave them the values that they all hold on to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, the conversation around Tom Holland and what he's pointing out is amazing. My husband's actually interviewing him tonight, and we'll ask the faith question.
Good on him.
So, yeah, it's a very small world. The point he's making is exactly this point. The stories that we surround ourselves in, they shape us. If we think that people have dignity and worth and value, that is a Christian value. If we think that people don't, and it's survival of the fittest, it means that we've adopted a different story. And one of the amazing things about Tom Holland's journey is that he's spent his most of his sort of adult life rejecting the Christian story because it was kind of done and boring and not that adventurous and not that exciting. And so he wanted to be Greco-Roman, or he wanted to sort of investigate some of the other spaces. And what he found was he found worldviews completely antithesis to his actual moral core. And he's like, I can't adopt these worldviews, these stories, because actually they create a world that I do not like and I do not agree with. And I think his journey is really interesting. What I would say is the reason he won't make that leap yet is because whilst he accepts the story as being a very powerful story, he can't accept the author of that story. And that's what he's really honest about. So actually, I would say our book goes one step further in saying that it is in Christ we find these stories, and it is in Christ we find our humanity. And if we don't know that, if we don't experience that, then actually our stories lack the same foundational strength that they actually need.
One of the things that you and people can actually watch watch you talk through the concepts in the book with Peter Linus on a YouTube channel. So if you're really keen, if you don't read the book, but you'd rather watch, Joe and Peter do this as on a number of YouTube clips that they've done with Right Now Media. Now, intriguing that you actually use what's it called? The Jeddah,
Jenga.
Jenga. You can see I'm right across the details there, Joe. Now, the whole concept of the Jenga, which is all the blocks, and the point that you guys make, which is helpful, which is what I think we're talking about here, is that when you pull out some of the blocks at the bottom, the whole tower gets very uneven, unbalanced, and there's the sort of the foundation is taken away. That's what you're trying to explore, isn't it? What happens when you pull out the major foundations?
Exactly. So one of everything in life is a sermon illustration, right? So one of the most traumatic things in my life at the moment is the fact that my house is falling down. And I'm very grateful to God that my house is falling down, because now I get to use it as a sermon illustration, and it's a very good one. So my house has that dreaded thing. It has subsidence, which basically means there is a big oak tree next to my house that has sucked the moisture out of the ground and caused my foundations, which aren't deep enough and aren't strong enough, to drop. And my house is now twisting. Now, what's interesting about that is that you don't look at the foundations. You can't see the foundations. My house is built on top of it, but you can see the effects of subsidence. So you can see the cracks in my walls. You can see the blinds falling down as the gap between the window panes strengthens. You can see the fact that my daughters can't close their bedroom doors anymore, because the whole house is shifting and cracking and straining under the pressure that it has been put under. We see the same in our society. Everywhere we look, there are cracks, there are stresses, there are strains, there are tensions, because our foundations aren't strong enough to sustain the weight of our lives upon them. And so we're looking and going, look, see the cracks, ask the questions as to why, and maybe we need to actually start rebuilding and strengthening our foundation stories so that we can live good, true, and beautiful lives to the glory of God.
It's interesting because you actually use the example of Peter's house, which has a few cracks, but it's not the same as yours. And we talked to Jo last week, and one of the things I talked about when reading her book and watching a couple of the YouTube clips was, how's your house, Jo? And I know everybody that's on, from Mornington and the Blue Mountains and even Oyster Bay just down the road, we're all now concerned about your house, Jo. You've just made everybody very nervous that your house is going to fall down. But Peter's house still has cracks, but that's just a natural part of the shift. So when the foundation is undermined, there are significant issues. And as you say, it's a great example, because that's what's happening throughout our communities.
Exactly. I mean, I can try every year to set New Year's resolutions to eat better, go to bed early, do some exercise. They're your kind of normal cracks of life. I'd like to tweak a bit here, touch up a bit there, sort out myself. And we can all do that. Sometimes we need a holiday. Sometimes we need to change a job. Sometimes we just need to mix things up a bit. We get stuck in a rut and there little cracks appear. That's fine. That's life. Sometimes those cracks get more severe if it's an illness or something else is going on in our family life. But again, pray a bit, chat a bit, do something will shift and something will be fine. These are deep-rooted, fundamental cultural and societal problems that need deep-rooted work. And we need to understand what the problems are and engage in a discipleship and a fullness of our God story in order to be able to live in and share what it means to be human.
Now, we're going to look at those 4 areas in the second half of our time together. And also there's the opportunity to ask questions. So all of you that have bounced on and said you're there, if you have a question for Jo, just put that in the chat, and we will endeavour to get to some of your questions in the second half of our time together. One of the pictures that you use as an example is this notion of a lens, and that you look at these 4 areas through a biblical lens. Now, I think you've already been chatting about that, but is there a way of talking about what does a biblical lens look like, and how does it influence how we think about these 4 areas of significance, connection, presence, and participation?
Sure. So lens is one of those kind of trendy phrases that's been around for a while. It's first and foremost just a way of viewing the world. So I wear contact lenses. You can't see that I'm as blind as a bat. You, on the other hand, Carl, wear glasses. I don't like it when I open the dishwasher and I get steam in my face and I can't see anything. So I hide the fact that I'm blind. But I cannot see the world clearly unless I've got my contacts in. And they may sometimes need cleaning. They may get a little worn, so I might need to replace them. I need to go to the opticians once a year, supposedly, to make sure that everything's all right. But most of the time, I simply look through them. I don't pay attention to the lens that I've got in, but it completely changes the way I see the world. In the same way, we may use figurative lenses. You may have a political lens, left or right. You may have an economic lens, more socialist to free markets. You may have a feminist lens on how you view the world. Whatever lens you may wear, it affects how you see what's going on in the world and some of the story framing that you may use. So we acknowledge that actually sometimes we need to use different lenses to see what's going on. And one of the things that we're doing is we're using this kind of human lens to view both the God story as told through the pages of the Bible and our cultural stories, asking specific questions. What does this text and what does this story tell us about who we are, about the image in whose we are made, and how we should share that out into the world? And then we also ask the same question: what does this lens show us about the stories that we're encountering and how they shape and change us too? So the lens is a way of viewing, and it asks us to ask specific questions and encounter and notice things that if we weren't wearing that lens, we might otherwise miss.
Yeah, and it helps explain why we have such in Western nations now. I mean, I guess it's been true for a long time, but certainly is true now. And as you look globally, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Gaza, whether it's the politics of America right now with the election coming up, all of these issues, it's almost like you'll hear somebody on the other side of an issue, and you just think, I can't believe that you would think that way. But the issue
Yes.
is, it's the kind of, they're seeing it through a particular lens. I mean, there's an issue, I probably shouldn't bring it up, but I will because I'm brave. I mean, right now, a very famous Australian who lives in England and plays for Chelsea is in a fair bit of trouble, let's say, quite a bit of controversy about something that she said about a policeman. Now, it's really interesting that the difference between somebody saying, well, yes, something should be done about that from a legal point of view, to other people saying, well, that's not really a racist thing to say. I guess it's got to do with the lens that you look at every situation and how you respond to them.
Exactly. And we see this all the time. This is why Twitter gets so explosive, is because the lens that we're seeing the world through is then reaffirmed by the echo chamber that we might find ourselves in, one of those great buzzwords that's floating around as well at the moment. So everybody agrees with the way that you see the world, and so is asking questions. But then you suddenly step out of that echo chamber and you discover that actually the way you see the world is just a version, and that other people may be perceiving the world in a different way. And that's what causes some of the culture wars and some of the culture clashes, because all of a sudden you're confronted with this idea that other people view the world very differently. And all you'd heard is, yeah, but you're right. And so if everybody thinks they're right, everybody starts yelling, and then we get into some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I remember that, years ago, I can't even remember who said this, which was a point of view is a view from a point. And it's trying to grasp what worldview each person comes from and how we respond to that. Just on this subject, how would you, from your background, experience in communication and engagement, how would you say to people to help grasp some other points of view or some other world views? How should we understand some of the lenses that people are using to look at the world?
That's a big and great question. I think a lot of it depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So for me personally, the starting point is to listen to some of the stories and some of the worldviews that are coming out and go, oh, okay. And you start to listen to some of the commonality. Oh, we both agree about this. That's good. There's some building blocks that we can agree on, some common ground to find. Oh, but that's interesting. You think this, I think that. Let's have a conversation about, let's find out. So for me personally, I like finding the common ground. I like engaging and having a listening space. Other people may engage with this quite differently. I mean, just to throw in another cultural reference at the moment, it's safe to say that Britain might have lost its mind over Kate Middleton at the moment.
Yes.
I'm assuming it has made its way over to you, the whole hoo-ha over the photo.
Yes.
And the conspiracy theories that are out there. And what I love about this story is, besides whether or not she's become a lizard person, which I doubt, is the fact that actually the whole idea of that photo coming out on Sunday was to say, look, see, everything's fine. Here's a photo to prove it. And actually, when you looked closely, you saw some of the flaws in it and some of the trickery and some of the lies of it. And you were actually able to say, oh, what I thought was true is actually there's some falsehood here. And I don't know now what is true and what is false. I need to investigate further. And I think that's the other thing that we're trying to do with this conversation and with this book and all the other resources, is to say there's some truth here, but there's also some fiction and some lies and some falsehood. Let's investigate further together and see actually where is the truth and what can we discover.
Yeah, Joe, we're going to come back to those points in a moment. So thank you. Just hang in there for a minute. We actually wanted to share with you, as we started the webinar, if you were there right at the beginning when it started, you would have noticed a whole bunch of clips out of our series called Faith Runs Deep. But we have a number of different series that many of you will know about. But just in case you don't, here's a small video which introduces some of the resources that Olive Tree Media has produced and that you can use in small groups, because small groups are always looking for material. We have lots of great material. And so here's an introduction to some of the small group material that Olive Tree Media has produced. Hi, Karl Faase here from Olive Tree Media. I want to take a moment to introduce what is the heart of our organisation. That is making quality video resources for churches and small groups to use and discuss. At Olive Tree Media, we want to help you to have meaningful discussions about the life and teaching of Jesus. That's why our major series like Towards Belief, Jesus the Game Changer, and Faith Runs Deep help you explore the importance of faith and the difference that it makes. Towards Belief is a series that tackles the tough questions of faith. It's a guide for those wrestling with doubt or seeking to understand the Christian worldview more deeply. Jesus the Game Changer is an exploration of the historical figure of Jesus and how his teachings have shaped our world. And Faith Runs Deep is a series that unearths our forgotten stories of faith here in Australia and considers the impact Christian people have had on who we are. The beauty of these series is that they are engaging and they will spark conversations that matter and draw people closer to Jesus. So if you're part of a small group, or if you're thinking of starting one, consider Olive Tree Media's resources. So head on over to olivetreemedia.com.au to discover more about our series and how you can use them in your small group. So, Joe, watching that, you would have felt right at home. And I'll let everybody, including Joe, into a little secret. That those shots of the small group, there was a small group doing Jesus the Game Changer. That was actually shot, I think it was in Bournemouth in the UK. There was a group doing that, and some friends of ours in the UK went down and filmed them doing Jesus the Game Changer. And and also you would have noticed so much of that footage actually comes out of the UK. So Towards Belief, Jesus the Game Changer, Faith Runs Deep, fabulous series. If your small group is looking for material, make sure you go and look at some of the material we have on our website. So Joe, just going on to some of these areas, you mentioned significance before. Surely significance is kind of like a foundational concept for people in Western nations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it's a foundational thing. But again, because of the conversations that we have as a society, despite the fact that everybody thinks that there is significance in being human, there isn't a huge amount of agreement as to who has significance and what do we do when that significance comes into conflict. So whether we see that blue lives matter, black lives matter, everybody matters, there's a whole load of matters conversations, because we don't have an agreement about what it means to be significant, where that significance comes from, and how to demonstrate it out into the world. So because of that secularization of our stories, that Charles Taylor quote, because we took God out of the foundation, we replaced it not with so much with an anti-God philosophy, but just a pro-doubt philosophy. Everything can be questioned. Everything gets a degree of skepticism attached to it. So we want to pull apart. We consider it healthy to ask questions, which is in a part right, but it means that there is no agreement. So I may see that I'm significant, or my family's significant, or it's important for me to care about my local area, but it doesn't follow that the person who's annoyed me in a call center because they keep phoning me, or because they won't handle my refund, or somebody's coming into my country because they are escaping a war, or, oh, I've got fireworks going off.
That cute effect.
Oh no. Okay, less hand gestures and less intelligence from Zoom. Good to know. Oh, I've lost it. I got quite
So let me
excited by the fireworks. Obviously, I was
that's
on a
right.
soapbox.
These fireworks were very significant, Joe. Let me just ask you though. One of the things that the people talk about is and this is sort of to do with connection, but let me talk about it here. The personal health and the psychological and social health of young women in Western nations kind of crashed and burned from about 2010, and every indicator for especially young women in Western society seems to have demonstrate that it's fallen away enormously. And it's often connected, it's been connected to either A, social media, or B, the like button on social media. How much is that, because everybody's out there on social media, which seems like we're wonderfully connected, which is the next point, but staying on significance. But then there's this sense of, I don't actually rate. So what does that mean? And that's incredibly difficult.
So difficult. And that's the challenge, isn't it? That I know I'm significant, but I don't know where my significance comes from. So I've either got to look to it for myself, and I've got to conjure it up and make sure that the world knows that it's my life and it's my power, and stuff the rest of you.
Yep.
Or I've got to look at it from other people, who's going to affirm me, who's going to validate me, who's going to say that they think I'm significant. And a lot of the time, it's a little bit of both. One minute I'm saying, stuff the lot of you, I'm great. And then the other, I'm like crying in self-doubt, looking at myself going, I'm useless and worthless. What on earth is going on? And we live in this sort of kind of back and forth, or at least I do. But I think we are definitely seeing that kind of susceptibility of the human being played on. So the serotonin and dopamine hits that you get when you see lots of likes, and then the crash when you don't, is massive.
Yes.
I was chatting to a youth worker in the UK, and she was saying that when she chats to teenagers, they describe social media as heroin, and they're like, they just throw it in our hands and they expect us to have the maturity to deal with it when they don't even know how to turn their phones off.
Wow.
And there's something really significant about that, pun, because we're putting tools in people's hands, and we're not asking particularly deep and meaningful questions about it. And we're not saying, look, your significance doesn't come from yourself, and it doesn't come from others. It is complete, and it is assured because you are made in the image of God. If you trust in that, everything else just is surface stuff. But if you haven't got that, all the surface stuff becomes absolutely core. And we wonder why young people especially are really struggling.
Yeah. Now, the interesting, going on to connection. So that's the significance, and seeing our significance as someone created in the image of God. The connection thing is, again, it's a crazy thing that we are more connected than we've ever been. Now, there's all these people connecting from basically all over the world to us to well, tonight our time, this morning your time, and then everybody's connected on their phones, and it's a bit like we've never been more connected, and yet people have never been more lonely. So how do you see that, and how does that play out in the whole idea of being connected?
Oh, absolutely. The hyper connectivity is just massive. I mean, I'm more familiar with the UK stats. So 3.3 million people in the UK would say that they are always lonely. We're seeing a massive spike in under or non-employment for young people because they can't get to work because of their mental health. The 20-somethings generation is sicker now than the 40-something generation. So the younger you are, the more sick you are in the UK. So the stats are insane. And we're supposed
Can
to
I just
be,
butt in on that?
yeah,
So what
yeah.
sort of sickness? You're saying that people in their 20s are less healthy in a whole bunch of different ways than people in their 40s. Is that because they're just given up, or is it got to do with diet, or is it what would that be? Because that's a remarkable stat.
Honestly, it's fairly safe to say it whizzed round my world quite fast. So the report came out about 2-3 weeks ago for the UK. It's mental health. So
Right. Yes.
people are either incapable of going to work or staying in jobs, or they are frequently off sick
Yeah.
because of anxiety, depression, or more complex mental health challenges.
Yeah.
So there is a growing awareness, and now the data to back it up, that says young people are finding life at a normal level increasingly challenging to navigate. And
Wow.
so they
And
are
when
out of
you think
work.
about the resources that we have available to everybody now and at every level, and yet it doesn't seem to doesn't seem to be helping. What in this area of connection, how do you see this, and would you be encouraging people to have connections beyond digital connections via their phone?
Oh, well, so the first thing I do is like I ban the phone from my daughters. So they don't get phones and they are very upset with me. Um, I think the recognition, we talked about this idea of presence, that we know we're connected and we love being connected. My ability to have this conversation with you is amazing. It's such a gift. We're on opposite sides of the world, and yet we're able to converse as if we were in the same room. That's insane. That's amazing. But there is a cost to that. There is a recognition that actually you and I aren't connected in some deep human way because we're not present to each other. When we went into lockdown and everybody locked themselves behind their doors and turned their screens on, the team that I work with here at the EEA, we're a really close-knit team. We work together really well. And then all of a sudden, we started having little friction points when we were talking on screens, because there was something missing from the way we related to each other. We couldn't see the little side glances, and we couldn't read somebody's body language in the room. The atmosphere wasn't transferable because it doesn't work. And all of a sudden, we lost something, and we had to work even harder to rebuild that connectivity because we were in some way absent, separated. We were disembodied from each other.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really significant to recognize, yes, the virtual does enable us to have connections, but it's disembodied. And in some weird way, we aren't. We are incarnate beings. We are physical. We are made from the dust.
Yeah.
There's something incredibly inherently physical about us. And if we detach from that, we're reaping the consequences of that in all sorts of ways.
And how that's the point you're getting here is that this is about the Christian story, the faith story that says that we're actually created in the image of God, but we're actually created for relationship. So actually, the Christian story says connection's important because that's how we were made.
Exactly. So we represent a Trinitarian God, a three persons in one being. We are literally made to represent relationship. That's where we get the biblical metaphors of marriage, for example, or family or body, because we are meant to be one and multiple. We have this paradox in our being. But we also don't worship a kind of a Gnostic gospel. So the idea that the soul is good, but the body is bad, that the material is dirty, and that there is this sort of transcendent soul spirit level that we should drop the body and just go after the soul. Actually, that's refuted in our story too. And there's a lot of kind of resonance with that kind of my inner self, my feelings, my experience is more significant than my body. I can change my hair, I can put makeup on, I can go to surgery, I can just redefine my physicality because it is just a tool, a costume that I can put on. Instead of recognizing that actually our bodies are really important. Jesus thought that bodies were so important. He was incarnate in one. He became flesh and blood. We cannot ignore our physicality, and it's really important.
Yeah, and that goes right to the heart of relationship and being embodied in our relationships, as it were. Presence. You're kind of talking about that being present. Is there a wider idea about being present, and where? What about? Talk about deconstruction. Where is this sort of deconstruction left people, and is that speak into this area now?
Oh, absolutely. So deconstruction, again, yet another buzzword. So it's the tear it all down storyline. So we want to shake off the shackles of oppression. We want to make sure that our stories are historically more moral. So if we look back with a kind of more modern lens, we're going to notice that some of the figures that we might have revered or studied, they're not as good as we once thought they were. So we want to tear down some of the pedestals. We want to notice some of the kind of, in my world, some of the colonialism and some of the impacts of some of that. And so deconstruction is saying we need to shake it all off. And we just need to live in our moment and own my story, be true to myself. And that inner truth cannot be oppressed. It can't be oppressed by institutions. It can't be oppressed by my history. It can't be oppressed by my sex or by my gender. Nobody is allowed to limit me. So all the construction of institutions, of shared order, anything that is apparently imposed upon me, that needs to be stripped away and taken away. Right. So deconstruction in the present is taking everything apart and saying, no, my kind of inner spirit is the only thing that's left. And my goodness, is that a lonely, burdensome place to be? And we wonder why people feel disattached to their sense of place, their sense of belonging, to their understanding of where they come from. They're constantly forced to reinvent themselves and project themselves as the most powerful person, but at the same time, not impose themselves on other people. It's hugely fraught and deeply damaging when we deconstruct everything, because we have no framework with which we rebuild any of our stories or any of our lives.
And do you think that, I mean, when you put all that together, when you think about the mental health of so many people, this younger generation, millennials and after, are those two things in tandem? The idea that we're deconstructing everything, the only thing that's left is what we create for ourselves. That's a pretty hard, what you're saying, that's a very hard place to live.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. In my opinion, if I put those two things together, one looks like the oak tree and the other one looks like my blinds falling down. These two things may not necessarily be so obviously connected, but if you follow that train through, you go, well, of course, this is the outworking of the stories that we're telling. Why are we surprised that this is the world that we're inhabiting?
The last area, the four areas, so we've had significance, connection, presence, and participation. For those of you who joined late, This is a book that Joe Frost co-authored with Peter Linus, and it's called Being Human. And there's 4 areas of significance, connection, presence, and participation. The difference we make to others. Give us a picture of participation. Where is that important?
I think it ends up right where we've kind of landed. So again, in my world, every next news article includes the word crisis. So we are seeing every crisis imaginable. We've got war, we've got economic crisis. I don't know if your journalists use the same phrase that we do. So we are in a cost of living crisis at the moment.
Yep.
We've got climate emergencies, just a political crisis. Everywhere we look, the world is in turmoil. And the only way to navigate some of these crises is for you to make the right next decision, because everything is precarious. And going back to that Jenga tower, so that toppling tower, all the bits have been pulled off. Everything is now a personal story. You make it up as you go along. The next person to take their turn is going to topple that entire tower.
Yeah.
So if you vote wrong, if you post the wrong thing, if you upset the apple cart, if you in some way perpetuate yet another crisis, that could be the crisis that sets everything off. And so we live in this world where the responsibility is all on the individual.
Yeah.
And yet none of us are capable of dealing with that and living like that. So we're left ultimately in our world with 2 choices. Either you do the Jordan Peterson, Marie Kondo kind of control your little world. So I'm going to make my bed, I'm going to tidy the Tupperware drawer, I'm going to control this little bit like a kind of control freak, because everything else is in complete chaos. So that's option 1. Option 2 is stuff it. I'm just going to pour a very large glass of wine, Netflix and chill, because the world's going to a hell in a handbasket. So what's the point? And they're really the 2 options our society are offering us at the moment, neither of which are particularly attractive to me.
Yeah.
Actually, what we need to remember is the fullness of the God story. The God story that doesn't start with sin and end with redemption on the cross, but actually starts in the garden with a good world and ends in a city with a world that is redeemed, made new, where God lives and there is no more death, crying, pain, because the old order of things is gone.
Can I
Our
jump in
story
there?
has hope in it.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Joe. Just to say that Joe Morgan has put a question about the idea of the Adam and Eve, and God created Adam and realized Adam needed a mate, and Eve was created, and we're meant to be together physically. And it's interesting what you're saying there about, if you're looking at the gospel, and I know you mentioned this in the book and you do in one of your videos, is that notion we often start with in the Christian story, if we want to share the Christian story of saying, we sin and then Jesus came for our sin. But what you're saying here, the point that Joe's making as well, is actually the garden is a better place to start the Christian story, isn't it? Because it's sort of saying, here's where we were created, in relationship, in participation together, in connection, presence of God, knowing that you're significant. That's the world we need to basically, that's the story we need to talk about. Not that we downplay sin, but to start with that good story.
Exactly. I mean, it's probably a good place to start because it's where our story starts. But we've often tried to simplify it, and we've often tried to make it a bit more accessible. But actually, the human story isn't that simple, and it isn't that accessible. And actually, we need a complicated, nuanced story to handle complicated and nuanced lives. But our story does start good. And it's really important to remember that no matter how your story is at the moment, your story started well. And it doesn't matter, well, it does matter, but the fact that your story may not be good right now does not mean that your story will end badly. It ends well. So how you start a story and how you end a story affects the story that you're telling. The lives of our stories start in goodness and they end in goodness. That affects the story we're living. So even if it doesn't look good right now, there is hope that all will be well. And that is a story worth sharing.
Joe, we got MP, who I'm sure has a longer name, might have jumped in a little bit late and said, can you share with us what brought you to the point of writing a book? Now, I know that you mentioned that right at the beginning, but if they missed it, what just give us that summary again about why did you and Peter write this book?
So this book was really a combination of being asked to talk about difficult topics where people seem to be arguing quite a lot, and say, is there a fundamental, foundational stories that will help us, no matter really what questions come down the line, they're all asking around the same issues of who are we and how should we live? So that was question number one. Can we give some foundations so that we can critically engage with any of these kind of what does it mean to be human, cultural conversations that are bubbling up? And also, when we're just out on the streets, having chats, talking to people, engaging with their lives as they're living them, how do we live out and share the good, true, and beautiful story of what it means to be human as shown by Jesus through the God story?
Yeah.
How do we offer life in all its fullness, which is Jesus's promises to all those who follow him?
Yeah, fabulous. I was just thinking, Joe, when you were talking about those two options that, the Jordan Peterson, clean your room. By the way, I think it's a good idea to clean your room, but if that control your
In
own
its
little,
proper place.
and then also that the world's going to hell in a handbasket, so who cares? If you think about what you were saying before about the health issues of a younger generation, and I know that there's financial issues within that. Drug abuse continues to grow. You wonder whether the second option is the one that people are choosing. We're not going to be able to afford a house. We can't. There doesn't seem to be a good career out there. We don't know if the world's going to end soon. So why would we bother? Thinking thoughtfully, carefully, planning for the future. And you wonder whether that second option of just like let it all hang out is what people are doing.
Potentially, I think there's probably an oscillating between the two. So
Yeah.
if anxiety is coming because you're so stressed about, oh my goodness, the whole world, my whole being is dependent on me. If I miss this deadline, if I screw up, if I wear the wrong clothes, if I post the wrong photo, oh my goodness, what is going to happen to my world? If that's the anxiety, then the opt-out crash and burn is its natural conclusion. So I think you probably see both happening simultaneously. And it's that conflict as those two options collide into the same storyline that is really causing some of this fundamental problems, especially for young people, because we haven't offered them a different story.
Yeah.
Actually, in our culture, they are the only games in town. And we
Yeah.
wonder why. But I was about to say no one's coming to church, but actually that's not true. The openness to the God story is massive. People are praying, people are trying church, people are coming in because their story isn't working. We just need to wake up sometimes in the church and go, ooh, maybe we've got a story to tell when people are asking questions.
Yeah, because it's interesting you should say that, because I was about to kind of, as we were wrapping this up, actually ask you, are you hopeful? Because there's a lot of reason to be feeling hopeless. What are you thinking there in the UK with the Evangelical Alliance, seeing across thousands of churches and organisations? Are you hopeful?
I'm so hopeful. Genuinely, I'm hearing more stories of people coming to church because of a dream that they had. I'm hearing of people coming to faith because of a TikTok video that they've watched. I'm hearing of people getting baptized after watching The Chosen. So we're seeing so many stories of faith, so many baptisms, so many people coming in. I was even saying to a colleague of mine, is it possible for us to be in revival and the church not realise? And I was like, absolutely. I think we probably are. And I think that's the other thing. We're so deeply skeptical of our own story. We're so bought into the secular storyline that we don't even believe that God could be moving. But he is beautifully, powerfully calling people to himself. We're seeing it all over the place. We're just not telling that story very well because we're thinking, oh, it's only one or two. But if we all shared it, we would realise it's thousands.
Yeah,
I have so much hope.
Well, that's fabulous. I mean, interesting. The other thing I've been quoting recently is the Ion Hershiali story, who was one of the new atheists, came out of a Muslim background, was radicalized as a Muslim, then became an atheist, and just last November wrote an article in the UK, as Joe would know, called Unheard, where she actually wrote an article that said the article was called "Why I'm Now a Christian," and her point was that living without a faith was unendurable. And you do wonder whether, if what you and Peter are saying is true in this book, which I think it is, that the cracks are showing not just in your house, but in society, then more and more people are going to get to the point where this is unendurable. What are the options? And perhaps faith and the person of Jesus is the option for them to pursue.
Amen.
Yeah. Listen, Joe, it's been fantastic. Thank you again. I'm holding the book up, being human. Make sure if now, where do you get this? Because I found this slightly difficult to get. You've got a copy as well. Is it available? Got it at every good bookshop? How do people get the book if they want the physical book?
Yeah, confession, I'm not quite sure what the
Okay.
distribution is like your neck of the woods. It is
Yep.
definitely available in the UK and the US via Amazon and all major retailers. We're published by Hodder, so you may be able to access it there. If you have any problems, though, you can find out all about us on beinghumanlens.com. Drop us an email and we should be able to ship something out to you.
Great. beinghumanlens.com, and check, your normal stores like Amazon, see if they've got them. And but also there's the videos there, all free, online. So make sure you can see Joe and Peter chatting about the book. Joe, thank you for your time. Thank you for getting up early in the UK. We trust the sun comes out once more before winter strikes, and and that you enjoy some summer. So thank you, Joe, for being with us. And thank you for all of you who have been with us, who have asked questions. And we want to remind you of a couple of things as we wrap up. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, just so that you know when the next webinars are on, or when we drop pieces of interviews, etc. So subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can keep up to date with what we're doing. A reminder that the next webinar is the 9th of May. It'll be 12:30 at lunchtime. So we're moving away from the evening to the lunchtime. The 9th of May at 12:30. Dan Patterson, Queenslander, has started an organization called Questioning Christianity. He is an apologist and a great guy, wonderful thinker, wonderful communicator. So I know that you're going to enjoy that. Remember that around the same time, and we'll talk about this at the next webinar, Ainsley's book Impress will be out. Be ready for Mother's Day. Make sure you look out for how you can get a copy of that book, Impress. We really appreciate the fact that you've been with us on this webinar live, and for all of you who said hi from all sorts of places, including Oklahoma, which is fabulous. And we're going to see you again next time. Thanks. All the best. Have a great day. Hi, Karl Faase here from Olive Tree Media. I want to take a moment to introduce what is the heart of our organisation. That is making quality video resources for churches and small groups to use and discuss. At Olive Tree Media, we want to help you to have meaningful discussions about the life and teaching of Jesus. That's why our major series like Towards Belief, Jesus the Game Changer, and Faith Runs Deep help you explore the importance of faith and the difference that it makes. Towards Belief is a series that tackles the tough questions of faith. It's a guide for those wrestling with doubt or seeking to understand the Christian worldview more deeply. Jesus the Game Changer is an exploration of the historical figure of Jesus and how his teachings have shaped our world. And Faith Runs Deep is a series that unearths our forgotten stories of faith here in Australia and considers the impact Christian people have had on who we are. The beauty of these series is that they are engaging and they will spark conversations that matter and draw people closer to Jesus. So if you're part of a small group, or if you're thinking of starting one, consider Olive Tree Media's resources. So head on over to olivetreemedia.com.au to discover more about our series and how you can use them in your small group.